Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. Folks, today we have a car that is very dear to my heart. This is one of my favorite old Camrys. I love these so much, I actually used to own 3 of them. These cars were basically a Lexus. They're so quiet, so refined, they're very comfortable, very smooth. And if you can still find one that is in good original shape, that doesn't have rust, that's not worn and have just kind of a lack of service history, these are really keepers. They're really good cars, they're really well made, and they're a joy to work on. This one is a 1999 XLE, which is actually one of my favorites because it has leather interior. We're going to take a look at this car. We're going to see a few things that we have with it. We're going to take a look inside the car, under the hood, underneath the car, just to see why these are so good. And along the way, some of the things you should be checking when you're looking to buy one of these, especially if you're buying it from Rusty Land, like where I'm at in Chicago. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. If you are a returning subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's check this thing out. Let's start with the inside of this car. And one thing I noticed before we start, the edge of the mirror is broken, but the mirror itself actually still works. This is something you'll see. This is the days where we had rigid mirrors. They didn't fold, so anything you hit it is unfortunately going to break that old brittle plastic. But let's take a look inside and I'll show you a few cool things about these Camrys. First, again, look at that old school Toyota interior. It just holds up so well. I mean, we have a few cracks here. This is again a 23-year-old car, but this is pretty impressive for a 23-year-old, daily driven, not an exotic or something that people would wash and keep. And this is just a car that is used daily. And this dash, in my opinion, it is timeless because it doesn't look very old and kind of ancient. It's a timeless design, just a flat dash, nothing exotic or crazy about it, but it looks very well. I'm being a little biased because I really love these cars. And this one has the original key, which you don't see these keys anymore. Most people just replace them. Let's look at the mileage. This one has 113,359. That is nothing for these. You will easily get these to 3, 4, 5, 6, 700,000 miles, and they'll just keep going with good maintenance. One thing that is cool about these, this one of course is an XLE, it has a sunroof, and of course this beautiful, very soft headliner, which they don't use anymore. But one thing cool about these, most people think this is a glass holder, but in this car, it's actually a button. You can put your garage door opener here, and then use some of these extensions, and you see the customer already used them. Usually these are like connected here and you rip them off and put them. You put your garage door opener here, then you close this and you can open your garage like that. That is pretty old technology, but that's how they did things on these. Folks, I really like these cars. They are beautiful. Let's check out the rear. Look at that legroom. These were extremely comfortable cars, folks. This is one thing about them. They're so smooth, so quiet, so refined. They're just really nice cars. If you drive one that is in good shape, like this one, you're gonna appreciate how well it drives. One thing else about this car, if you look here, you see this, like mud. This is a car that was parked, not driven for long periods of time. And the owner of this car is the second owner. He just bought this car from an older couple that had this car since new. They were the original owners. Didn't drive it much, hence the low miles. And these are the signs of it. This was parked, and water and rain and whatnot, and just makes these marks. And another mark of older cars that you will see that are not driven much, and I want to share this with you. If you lower the glass and you look at it, you see this giant mark. Now this one doesn't have it as much, probably it was cleaned. But if you see like a black line right here and like black dots all over the top of the glass, this is actually the seal. And you'll see these one owner cars that nobody has ever rolled the back window. Actually, the seal started to imprint on the glass. If you ever see that, that is a sign of a car that has very little use in the back. Let's look under the hood of this beauty. And one thing is, if you ever want to work out, you own one of these cars, just use the hood. This thing is super heavy. 97 to 99 actually did not have hood shocks. 2000 and 2001 did have hood shocks. And once more, it seems like we have a theme with the channel. 1MZ FE, one of the best engines they ever made. If you take care of it though. This one has been taken care of because it runs like a clock and it's just so quiet. This was the time where we have no chains, no direct injection, no variable valve timing. These engines were so simple and so quiet because they don't have much going on with them. Of course, gas mileage was okay for these. Emissions were very high. If you own one of these cars and you start it in the morning, even if you have the best exhaust, it'll smell and you'll smell it immediately. You know, that's why we're going to the newer engines, because they're actually less harmful to the environment, but still it's nice to see one of these. Now, I do have a couple concerns immediately. Now, I've looked at this car. I have a couple concerns immediately that you need to know about if you own one of these. 1MZ, 3MZ, same thing. This owner recently have had the valve covers replaced and the spark plug wires replaced by another mechanic. Now, the gentleman that did this work, according to the owner of this car, he's a master mechanic. However, he's a Dodge technician. He works at a Dodge dealership, so he's not a Toyota specialist, but nonetheless, cars are cars, and I understand. But there's one thing about these engines when you do the valve covers that is a specialist thing. If you don't know about it, you could actually have this job fail, and we're back to square one. If you look right here, if you look right here, see he put the sealer right there, you see it very clearly. But actually, underneath the sealer, there's something we call a half moon. It's basically a half moon shaped plug that he did not reseal, because you see how it's in the original sealer. You see the difference in color there? Trying the best to show you. There's two of these half moons here, and there's two in the back. Well, he did not reseal them, and this is a very common mistake. See, I don't fault him for this because he probably didn't know about this. He's not a product specialist, and that's okay. But unfortunately, there are Toyota mechanics that also do this because they're lazy, because that would be malintent purposefully. But this person, this gentleman, did not know about this. I don't blame him. However, folks, whenever you do this, if you are having a mechanic that is not a Toyota mechanic, you got to tell him, take these half moons out and reseal them. All you're going to do is, they're basically a half moon shape, half circle. You're going to pop them out, clean them up, and put sealer and put them back, because these are actually what leaks more than the valve cover, especially at this age. The other problem, and this is not the same gentleman, this is actually how the car was when the owner bought it. The hoses. First, these are aftermarket hoses. Don't understand why, because if these hoses were original, they'd still be perfect. But somebody replaced them. But the problem is, this is sitting on the edge. It's like you couldn't push it all the way in. And the same thing on the other hose right here. Like you couldn't push this hose all the way in. So I just can't stand for this. So let's fix that real quick. Loosen the radiator cap. This car is cold. Shouldn't have much pressure in it. Okay, we don't have any pressure. I'm going to close this. Put a rag here in case we have any coolant that falls. Now this is an original radiator, so I'm going to be very careful with it. We're going to loosen this clamp. There we go. Try to keep this clamp in the same position. I really, really dislike these clamps, because if you over tighten this guy, you could crack the radiator. If you under tighten it, it could leak. Not a great idea. The tension clamps from the factory, if you ever replace a Toyota hose, replace these clamps, because they are designed to have the perfect tension that is not too loose to leak or too strong to break things, especially plastic components. But the biggest thing is when the hoses expand and contract from heat and cold, they expand and contract with it. These don't. So when this car heats up, this clamp will start putting too much force, and then when it cools down, it could potentially be too loose. You see how this is? So this one is good now. I am happy with this one. I'm gonna do this one as well, real quick. This one, thankfully, is connected to a metal pipe, so I'm less nervous with it. There's a screwdriver. Now, I want to say one thing about this. Why wasn't this done? I don't understand what was so hard about it. Like, this was super easy to do. You're basically having this hose sit at the edge of the radiator neck, and now it could just snap it. I don't get it. I don't get why this mechanics do this, but they still do, because I see it, and it doesn't make sense. Let's continue to look around this, because I want to make sure we don't have any other issues. Of course, old school, cruise control, original starter. This is why Toyota has the name. This is an original starter that's 23 years old. Pretty impressive. And equally, original alternator, folks. This is incredible. I don't see a timing belt sticker, so that's something we're gonna try to look at. But look at this. Heavy, heavy. Look how big that insulation is. That's why these cars are quiet. Heavy insulation on the hood. Old school EGR system. Actually, this one doesn't have a lot of problems. Very little problems. But everything else is so easy on this car to work on. Timing belt. And the mount here does have a few cracks, nothing too excessive. Does have a little bit of movement, but nothing I'm gonna worry about right now. Looking everywhere in the back, the valve covers were done, so that's good. This is something that is super old school. This diagnostic connector. So this carried over from OBD1 days. This is what you used to use to actually connect a scan tool. Or you could do a bunch of tests by jumping 2 pins to run codes and whatnot. This is super old school. You don't see stuff like this in new cars anymore. One other thing is the power steering. We don't have any leaks on the line, so that's good. This car is in really good shape, folks. I mean, look at everything. I suspect these mounts are aftermarket. We're gonna take a look real quick when we have the car up. But this car is in great shape, actually. One more thing I wanted to add as a bonus. Do you see these? These are actually VIN stickers from the factory. This is how you know this car has been in an accident or not. There's one there, there's one here, and if you look at the bumper, there it is. There's one on the bumper. This is very important. This is how you know this car has been in an accident or not. So when you see these are a good indication to check for accidents, especially the one on the bumper there. That is a very important one. Beautiful car. Let's lift it up. Let's take a look underneath it, and we'll continue. Let's take a look underneath this beautiful 99 Camry. Would you look at that? Beautiful, beautiful car. There's absolutely no leaks on this 23-year-old transmission. Nothing. And here, you'll see some oil right there. This is actually from the valve cover. These are old stuff, all this oil. And the oil filter is right here, so that some of it might be a sloppy oil change. And this as well. This is actually not an active leak. This is an old leak from the valve cover. This is beautiful. One thing I noticed, there might have been some exhaust work here, and there's more in the back. There's this bracket that goes right here. It's missing. That is typical to see when somebody worked. Something about these old cars, and it's not just the Camry. The shield is actually metal. It's not a plastic shield. So this whole pipe is actually not original. When you see this style bend, this is not original. The original ones will look beautiful, not wrinkled like this. Then we look further up. You can see some of the oil right there. That's all from the valve cover, folks. This is old stuff that just needs to be cleaned up. This is a drain plug for the differential. This actually had a separate differential fluid than the transmission. It was still transmission fluid, but it had a separate fluid container. It's pretty cool. And the rest of the car is actually not, the body is not rusty at all. And this is really good. Looks like something happened here. Might have been scraped and somebody tried to attempt to fix it. One thing about these you always got to check is the brake lines, and these appear to be in good shape. The brake lines and the fuel lines. Hard to see it from here, but I did check them earlier. They're in good shape. They're not rusty. You can see them right there because these were not coated. And what happens with these is, you see this cover, especially in rusty land over here, this cover would load up with snow and you have salt and it just sits there like literally soaking the brake lines to rot them out. This one doesn't seem to have really bad brake lines. They're actually in really good shape because this was probably not driven a lot in heavy snow. Typically older people will not want to drive in heavy snow. They'll stay home until it clears up. So that's usually what happened with their cars. This one is really good shape, folks. Something else about the suspension. This is a not so beautiful aftermarket ball joint. You can see the grease fitting at the bottom. This is the worst idea. Probably some point at some time, some mechanic somewhere decided, oh, let's change the ball joints because they're old, because he's used to Chevys and Fords. Well, if you would have left the original ball joint, it would have probably been fine. And the strut, I can see it from here, is a quick strut. You see that logo right there? On this one, you can actually still read it. Quick strut. And it's very rusty. This is probably hasn't been here for long. It's already very rusty. This is something that probably this car would have needed. Something was common with these is the struts kind of started making noise and the mounts. Something else that is common with these is the sway bar links, which this one actually has play. The best way to check these is to grab the bar and move it up and down. See how this one is moving up and down. Very common on these. This side you can actually hear it. So these are done. Very common with these. Let's look at the power steering. The high pressure hose doesn't have any leaks, so that's good. This is this little seepage right here. That is not an issue. That is typical for these. But the boots are dry. Now this boot has engine oil on it from the valve cover leak that was fixed. So I am not concerned about that. These are not very common for power steering leaks, rack and pinion. Let's look in the back. And when you see this, you're probably, especially if you're not from Rusty Land, you're gonna think, oh wow, this thing is ready for the junkyard. But you know what? Welcome to salt use in the street. This is completely normal. This is all surface rust, folks. There's nothing to be concerned of. You look at it, it's all rusty. That is very normal for our area. But when we start looking closer, see this strut, how it's like scaling up right there. This is actually an aftermarket strut. Again, I have the same thing. Something that is super common with these is the sway bar bushing right there, getting loose and making all kinds of noise. But something that this customer did have an issue with is this. The fuel tank heat shield is resting against the exhaust. And this exhaust looks like it was recently fixed. You can see it welded right there, They probably hit it. This thing was so rusty, it just broke off and fell off. That's very typical, very common with these. And the only way to fix it really is to replace the shield. I'm gonna try to tie it up for now until we order the shield up, just so it's not rattling away. But again, you see those brake lines right here. This is the best spot to see them is right here. Right where they come down. You can see how clean they are. They don't have a lot of rust. Usually this spot will be the worst one. And then here's that fuel line that comes to the side. And looking at the back here, this fuel tank strap is a little rusty, but it's not to a point where it's getting dangerous. This is typical for these. They're really high quality straps. And of course, we cannot pass the video without saying this. Oh, do you look at that? Another missing body plug and a rust around it. Folks, with newer cars, that one is missing as well. You want to check this, unless you want your car to look like this, and this is not good. I mean, You know, the factory put these plugs for a reason. Put them back. It doesn't hurt. Something else here is the filler neck, and this is something also common with these. You see how rusty this is? Remember, this car has evap. Eventually, this is going to leak. Something else that is super common with these is this valve right here on the canister. This is a charcoal canister. This valve is notorious to go bad, and usually at dealership level, they replace the whole canister. If you're DIY, you can actually try to buy this valve separate and see. Sometimes it wouldn't work because the canister internally is clogged, but it's worth a shot to replace just this valve when you have codes for evap and if it doesn't work. And the last thing is these control arms. These two. At this age, now this one is fine, but at this age, it would be a good idea to check them for play, because you'll have some of the bushings go bad there and they start making noise over bumps, and then on acceleration, on especially a highway, you'll feel like the car will shift because these control arms will move. But again, this is 23 years later. You're not looking at this at 5 years like some other makes and models where it's the norm to be replacing control arms left and right. Not on Toyota land. And even though you see this, how rusty this is, and you have flakes falling off of it, that is okay, because the integrity is not compromised. This is how well these things were made. Even when they get this rusty, they're not going to just break off and fall apart. No. Something that we're starting to see on these, on the really rusty examples, this rear cross member, it will start rotting right here. But this one is actually in great shape. Yeah, it looks rusty, I know, but that's normal, but it doesn't have rot, so that's good. So folks, this generation Camry, 1997-2001, one of my favorite generations. They are really good. However, I would have to say one thing to keep things clear for you. These are becoming harder and harder to find in good shape. You know, these are getting up in age, and especially if you have rust with them or neglect or lack of maintenance over the years, they add up to a lot. Here's a typical scenario that I see people when they have these. The valve covers are leaking. Timing belt is due. Some of the suspension stuff, you know, these sway bar links, they're not cheap from Toyota, by the way. Sway bar links are gone. The struts are rusty or worn and they need replacement. The brake lines are rusty. And then control arms in the back, and it adds up to a lot where they get to a point where it's like, I'm spending more than what this car is worth. Between you and I, if you're DIY, it's worth it because these cars are really good. If everything else is fine, if the engine and trans shift's fine, which they really rarely have problems with good maintenance, it's worth it. But I can understand why people would let go of them. We're not going to spend $3,000-$4,000 on a car like this, even though I did have a customer a while back, bought a brand new engine, a Reman aftermarket engine. I think I posted it on Instagram. They spend over $7,000 on this car because they're really good cars and they love them. You go to the next generation Camry, it's also nice, but you feel a slight drop because this was built like a Lexus. Just the way it drives and the way it insulates the outside, it is beautiful. These are becoming really hard to find in good shape. Rusty, or the ones that are really nice, like this one, people don't sell them because they're really good. The owner of this car got lucky with this one because this is in really good shape. Folks, I know you see the rust and everything. That's very normal here, and I've seen 10 times worse in cars that are a lot newer than this. This is just the way it is with rust. You own one of these cars, take care of them. Ideally, people who own these cars will be somewhat DIY. Yeah, you might not tackle some of the bigger jobs, but the little jobs, tackle them yourself and you will have this car for actually a long time. And one thing about one of the cars that I've owned, I actually bought it, it was broken, it had some electrical issues from the owner trying to do some stuff that went south. I bought it for $700 and fixed it up, and it was gonna be a quick flip. But a year later, I was still struggling to sell it. Just how beautiful. Here are some pictures of that car. It was a beautiful gallery series. I really liked that car. I ended up selling it to somebody who was a new driver, needed a car, and that was a perfect car for them. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope this gives you a glimpse of the olden days, or if you're trying to find a car for your kid, or you just need a car to get you by, especially now with the times that we live in. New cars are hard to come by and people are going back to older cars to buy them. Be careful with these, but at the same time, if you find a good one, these are really good. So this is like the fine line you have to walk with these. Be very careful. Don't just jump on them just because they have a good reputation. Some of them could actually be really bad if they're not taken care of and they have all the pile up of stuff. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.